Welcome back to the Love You Sew YouTube channel. Today we are going to make the Brooke Bottle Holder. If you love hydration and staying organized, this pattern is for you. This bag was designed with an expandable cargo pocket for your cell phone, a sleek slip pocket for keys or lip balm, 2 top handles for a close carry option, a cardslot lining, and also an option for a solid lining. You can also see there is a tab closure that will fit underneath any mug style tumbler, but of course you can use any type of water bottle with this bag. There is a cinch drawstring that will keep any size water bottle nice and secure, and there is an adjustable crossbody strap to keep you hands-free. As always, my sew along videos are designed to be companion tools to the actual pattern, which you can find in the description of this video. Now let's get started with the inventory. First, we have the ring tabs in cotton canvas, and everything that is cotton canvas has been interfaced. Then we have the tab closure with a wax canvas as the main and a lightweight khaki waterproof canvas as the lining. Here we have the cargo pocket flap, and then we have the actual cargo pocket in that cotton canvas again and the lightweight waterproof canvas. We have the pocket panels in the wax canvas and 4 pieces of the side panels all in the wax canvas, which you have seen is completely unlined. Then we have the slip pocket with the cotton canvas and the unlined waterproof canvas. Then we have 2 top panel main, 1 top panel lining, along with 2 bottom panel mains and 1 bottom panel lining. Then we have the card slots in the waterproof canvas, again, all unlined. And then the card sides in the waterproof canvas. And then we have the full solid panel, again, in the unlined water. For other supplies, we have our 1-inch webbing that's going to be used for the handles and the adjustable strap. Then we have the hardware for that strap and the connectors. And last but not least is the drawstring and then the cord stopper. This drawstring is about 3 millimeters and the cord stopper has 5 millimeter holes. Now let's get started with the instructions. Since all of my template pieces have been cut and interfaced, we are going to move into step number 3 to make the handles. You're going to cut all of your webbing to the correct length, and then we always like to prep those ends to prevent them from unraveling. Since this is a polyester material, I can just use a lighter to melt them down, but if you are using a cotton material, you can use your freight check, or you can sew back and forth on those ends to prevent them from unraveling later. Once your handles are prepped, you will want to mark them according to the instructions, and that's marking the centers and then 2.5 inches on both sides of that center marking to give you a 5-inch rolled handle. Then, and you want to make sure that this is all done on the wrong side of your webbing. Then you will lay down a little bit of glue sparingly on that edge, and you will fold the handle wrong sides together in between the markings that you had just made. Over at the machine, we are going to sew in between those markings for the rolled handle and also increase our stitch length for the thickness of the handle. And if you happen to have a wider presser foot, I like to use a piece of scrap webbing to place underneath it to help support that foot. That will give you nice even stitches and prevent any skip stitches as well. But luckily this presser foot is pretty well even on this webbing, and I'm able to sew from marking to marking. Make sure to backstitch well at the beginning and at the end of your seam because this is going to be a high stress area. After making that second rolled handle, it's time to sew them onto the top panel main. You can see with the wax canvas, it is all already marked, and as I cut, I always like to mark the right side of the fabric. Then it's time to add a little bit of glue about an inch up. You don't want to go too high or you are going to see it behind the handle. Then you will take each handle and place it in between the markings. You can see that this one actually is not rolled. I ended up deciding that I wanted to show you what a flat handle would look like. And this is a nice, easy way to skip a step and to make this pattern a little bit more streamlined. Now it's time to mark our seam allowance and then the X box where we will sew down the handle. I love using an X box because I feel like it's one of the most secure ways to keep a handle down over time, especially if you love a particular bag. If you decide to use a rivet later on, I would suggest putting that marking just below the top line of the X box. After marking both sides of the handle, it's time to head over to the machine. You want to first baste each handle down in that seam allowance first, and then go into changing your stitch length and sewing that X box down. Now you can sew the X box however you would like. This is the way that I like to sew it so that I can get 2 rows of stitching across the top of the X box. Again, it's just to keep things as secure as possible because I would like to make sure that these handles stay intact if there are years of wear with this bag. Repeat this on the other side of the same handle and then follow step 4 again with your remaining handle. Now it's on to making the adjustable strap. This part of the video is going to go through a little bit more quickly because I have a more detailed separate video which will be linked. You can see that the slider has already been added so that the right side of the webbing is shown up top, and then both of the swivel clasps have been added on. You will slide that webbing underneath that slider in order to make it adjustable, and I always like the fold of the webbing to sit in between the webbing and not against my shoulder. Because water bottles can get pretty heavy, you are more than welcome to use a wider 1 1/2 inch to a 2-inch strap here. But for the handles that we made previously, they should stay at a 1-inch webbing. You can see that this adjustable handle is being finished with rivets. And if you would like to see the X box sewn with this, you can again go to the separate detailed video that is linked. Since I'm using rivets, you can see that I had flamed the holes of the polyester webbing. This helps kind of seal that circle area. I've used this webbing before, so I felt pretty safe using my lighter, but you can also heat up and place that in the center of the holes. I love being able to use rivets through these really thick layers, and it gives such a nice polished finish to the adjustable strap. Now it's time to create the ring tabs. You will take each one and fold each side into the center and press well. Then it's time to take both of the ring tabs over to your machine and sew each folded side down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Place each of your ring tabs inside of your triangle ring and base those raw edges together. Optionally, you can use a rivet to secure the tab to the bag later, and If you do, you want to switch out to a zipper foot and sew as close to the hardware as possible. At this point in the process, I was going to sew the tab onto the bag, but you'll see later that I changed my mind and used a rivet instead. Next, we are going to combine the tab closure and the cargo pocket flap steps. To mark the Velcro placement, I like to use a hole punch to punch out those corners, and then you can just put a little dot where those corners are supposed to be. Then you can grab your Velcro, use glue to place it where it is supposed to be, or use that double-sided tape and put it in the center of the Velcro. You just want to avoid putting it anywhere along the edge where you are actually going to sew, because else it's going to gunk up your needle. Now it's time to actually move over to the tab closer. So you will follow those same steps that I just showed you with the flap, and you will attach the hook side of the fastener over to your tab closure lining. Then it's time to go over to the machine and edge stitch that Velcro on. Then you will take the tab closure lining and place it right sides together with your tab closure main. And it's hard to see right now with the wax canvas, but that is the main, and I have marked little T's in all of the corners of the wax canvas to show which side is the right side, and that's what you should definitely do beforehand to keep yourself straight. Then sew around the entire curved side of the tab closure. Now it's time to sew around the curve, which you do want to take some care with. So I just go normal pace at the straightaway, and once I start to get a little bit of that curve where you have meet the needle, you will want to start to lift your presser foot basically every stitch in order to make it as smooth as possible. And you want to make sure that you are looking right here in order to make sure that that curve matches your seam allowance. I'm actually sewing pretty slow. This is sped up about 2 times. So you want to make sure that you go around those curves nice and slowly in order to get your curves even. To flip the tab closure right side out, first we got to trim it. So you got to notch those corners. I like to use serrated scissors, but you are more than welcome to just use your regular scissors and cut out the little V notches yourself. Now, as you turn the tab closure right side out, just carefully push out the corners, first using your fingers, and then you can use a tool if needed. I like to use my fingers just to make sure I'm not actually poking out in those seams. Make sure it's even, and then you're ready to go back to the machine. Now it's time to top stitch. Again, you want to make sure that you are looking at where the needle is placing down in order to get that nice even curve. I have increased my stitch length a little bit just to get around all of these layers, and again, moving so slow around that curve and lifting the presser foot every stitch around that curve to make sure it is nice and even. And don't forget to base the side straight edge of the tab closure. Admire your work, and then it's time to move on to the cargo pocket flap. All of these steps for the cargo pocket flap are the same as the tab closure. So you'll see that the video has been sped up quite a bit to accommodate that. We have edge stitched the Velcro into place, and then are taking the lining and the main fabric with right sides together. Then it's time to sew around the curved side of the flap. When I was sewing this, the pressure on my machine happened to be very light. So my stitches were long and loose, which is not good when turning out a flap for a bag. So you'll see that I actually went back, reduced my stitch length, corrected the pressure on my machine, and re-sewed at those corners because I would hate to see the stitching when I turn this flap out later. Then it's time to turn the cargo flap right side out. We will notch the corners with the serrated scissors, again, to save a little bit of time, and then make sure to clip the corners so that you can reduce bulk out of the seam allowance later on. Turn the flap right side out, and we do not have any big exposed stitches showing since I'd reinforced those curved corners. Make sure you press well, avoiding the Velcro because that will melt. Then it's back at the machine to top stitch along the flap. You just want to make sure that you are keeping the top stitching nice and even. Again, taking note of where the needle hits the curve of the flap so that you stay even. I'm lifting up that presser foot every stitch to make sure it is even and you are not going to sew into any of the Velcro. And just like with the tab closure, you are going to base that straight edge shut. Set both the tab closure and the cargo pocket flap aside, and we'll move on to the cargo pocket itself. With your cargo pocket main, make sure you mark the Velcro placement, and just like before, we have the four corners. This time I have the loop part of the Velcro and am gluing it on. Since we are pros at sewing on Velcro, we are going to speed through this part. Then I'm grabbing the cargo pocket lining with the right side facing up, which is the textured, non-shiny side. Then place the cargo pocket main right sides together with the lining and sew that top straight edge together. Make sure to clip the corners and then flip the pocket right side out and press along that folded edge. After pressing, make sure that all of the edges of the cargo pocket are aligned with the main and the lining fabrics pinned together so that they do not shift while you sew. Then you can top stitch along that fold. Once you are done, you can go around the entire pocket and base the rest of the edges together. Make sure your cargo pocket is marked as shown. You want the peak lines on your main fabric, and then you want the valley lines on your lining fabric. Then you will go and fold along each of the peak markings and just finger press together. Clip in place, and you will then take your cargo pocket over to the sewing machine and top stitch this fold into place. At the machine, we are going to increase the stitch length and then also use a hump jumper to get through all of these layers. If you do not have one, this is such a good little tool to have, and you can always use a piece of webbing that is folded over in order to help level out your presser foot for nice even stitches. So along each of the peak lines in order to create the edge of our cargo pocket. Make sure to backstitch well at the top of the cargo pocket because it is going to get a lot of stress as you open and close it. Now with the lining facing up, you want to fold along the valley lines with the main fabric right sides together. You will finger press along the valley line and then clip together. You'll see that you have now created an accordion fold on each side of the cargo pocket, which will then create volume for your cell phone later. I'm strategically placing all of my clips so that the pocket is going to be over to my left-hand side as I sew. This keeps the bulk of the pocket out of the way, and then you can sew on a more even surface and have much more success with even stitches. And you might need to use that hump jumper again to get over the top edge of your cargo pocket. Make sure to backstitch well at the top of the pocket so that it stays secure, and then you can admire your great accordion folds. Now that the folds are sewn into place, you can see that the side edges of the cargo pocket will stick out about 3/8 of an inch beyond that peak fold, and that is because it is going to be sewn into that seam allowance. Then grab your pocket panel and the cargo pocket. Align the top edge of the cargo pocket to that top notch on the pocket panel. Then align the sides and the bottom corner of that cargo pocket to that of the pocket panel. Clip everything into place, and then you will baste the sides only together, which I have done off camera. You'll notice that the cargo pocket is hanging about 3/8 of an inch lower than with the pocket panel, and that is because we are going to create volume and it will be closed up a little bit later in the process. Now it's time to move on to the side panels, and you'll see that I have already marked my tab closure for an S for Stanley, and that's going to sit on the right side with the left side being plain. Match the right sides together with the side panels and the cargo pocket, aligning the corners, and then you will sew them all down. As we begin to assemble all of the panels together, just keep in mind that you want to stay true to the 3/8 inch seam allowance. This is very important because if you are going too little or too much, then you will throw off the size of your panel. Just to make sure that you are staying on track, remember that you can always double check with the full panel template to make sure that you are sewing to the correct size. With both side panels sewn on, you will open up the side panel with the seam allowances facing toward the outside, and you will top stitch the side panel going all the way through to the seam allowance. Now we are going to skip ahead just a little bit and close the cargo pocket right now in step 20, and then we'll go back to adding on the flap and the ring tab just a little later. So what I like to do is to match up the notches for the bottom of the cargo pocket with that of the pocket panel. And I like to actually use a pin here because we are dealing with a little bit of thickness, a little bit of opposing pressure, so the pins kind of help to keep everything in check. And you'll see that I put that second pin where the I guess I'll say the valley fold is, and you want to make sure that that stays aligned with the bottom of the pocket panel, and then you are going to muscle that peak fold to align again with the bottom edge of that pocket panel. You can add as many pins as you would like here to keep it all secure, or you can use a couple of clips as well. But you can see how the bottom of the cargo pocket is completely aligned with the pocket panel, and this is creating that nice volume that is going to be used, to hold all of your personal items. And then you'll want to make sure to repeat all of these same steps over on the other side of your cargo pocket. Once you are ready, it is time to head over to the machine and baste all of this together. As you prepare to baste the cargo pocket closed, just try to flatten out as much of that pocket underneath your presser foot as possible. And then grab an awl, or in this case, some tweezers, to help push that fabric and keep it flat as much as possible. I'm trying not to sew over these pins, but I'm kind of waiting until the last minute in order to make sure that everything stays where it's supposed to be. Then you can go back and trim off any excess of the cargo pocket that might have run over the edge of the pocket panel. Now we're going to backtrack a little and then add the ring tab and then the cargo pocket flap. With the ring tab, I'm going to make sure to align it to the stitching of the side panel and then match the pocket flap centered along the top of that pocket panel. You'll notice that the Velcro does not match up right now because the pocket flap is actually supposed to push up in order to hold a lot of your personal belongings. Once everything is aligned to the top of the panel, it's time to take it over to your machine and baste together. We are done with the cargo pocket for now, so you can set aside, and now it is time to work on the slip pocket. Grab the slip pocket main and lining and place them right sides together, aligning the top edge. Clip them together and sew with a full seam allowance. Clip the corners to help reduce bulk, and then you will flip the pocket so that the wrong sides are facing each other. Press that fold well, and then it is time to come back in and top stitch and then baste around the rest of the slip pocket. Grab your remaining pocket panel and align the top edge of the slip pocket to those top notches again. As you align the slip pocket to the pocket panel, you'll notice that that top folded edge is going to puff out a little bit, again creating volume so that once the whole bag is assembled, you are going to actually have space in that slip pocket. Then it's time to head to the machine and baste the pocket to the pocket panel. And just like with the cargo pocket, we are going to align the side panels, right sides together. So with a full seam allowance, open them back up and then top stitch the side panels to the seam allowances once again. Don't forget to double check your work at this point. Make sure it is the same width as your full panel. Now it's time to add the Velcro to the side of the bag. The Velcro positioning has already been marked with those four corners, and now the loop side of the Velcro is being added to the left side panel right here. Make sure that everything is aligned. Allow that glue to dry before sewing. But in the meantime, we will take the last ring tab and align it to that stitching on the right side panel. Now at the machine, we're going to edge stitch the Velcro onto that side panel. You're going to go over a little bit of different thicknesses with that seam allowance in the way, so just be careful as you maneuver around. And then you will baste the ring tab up top, and now it's time to finish off these exterior panels. We are back with the cargo pocket facing up on the work surface. Then you are going to grab one of the top panels and start to align that bottom edge of the top panel with the cargo pocket, all with, of course, right sides facing together. You'll see that I'm taking care with the handles and nesting them right inside of the side panel seams. Once those are nested together, then you can ease the rest of the top panel into place and clip well. And while we're here, we might as well skip to step 26 and add the bottom panel as well. You'll want to make sure that you match those center notches, and then you can match the side edges and clip everything together. It's time to move over to the machine and sew the top panel to the cargo pocket. You'll notice that I switched over to my zipper foot because there is a lot of volume going on with the top of that cargo pocket, and so it wasn't giving me a lot of room with my wider presser foot. So I switched over to a zipper foot in order to make sure that I am able to get my full seam allowance in. Make sure to go slowly and try to push out as much of the pocket out of the way toward the left-hand side as much as possible, because you want as much of that bulk out of the way so that you get a nice straight seam. Since I was working with my zipper foot and all of this like uneven sewing level, I had to go back and just re-sew the end of my seam because it was very loose stitching. Everything is looking good. Now it is time to top stitch along that top panel. You'll see that with that cargo pocket placement, it gives just about 1/8 of an inch gap between the top flap in order for you to be able to top stitch that seam allowance facing down towards the bottom of the bag. You'll have to work around the top of the cargo pocket a little bit. Just work slowly and move the top of that pocket away as needed. If you have a wide presser foot, go ahead and use a zipper foot in order to sew that seam down. Now it's time to sew the bottom panel to the cargo pocket. Again, just trying to make sure that you're flat as possible. The cargo pocket is as flat as possible while you sew through. You can see that I changed back to my regular presser foot because it gives me a little bit more stability than the zipper foot does. And you just move slowly, again, just moving any of that thickness in the cargo pocket out of the way and adjust your stitch length as needed. With the bottom panel pressed open, in this case with wax canvas, we're finger pressing, top stitch along that seam going through to the seam allowance. Make sure that seam allowance is pressed toward the bottom of the bag. You can set the cargo pocket aside and then grab the slip pocket panel now. It is time to do a little rinse and repeat. You will clip the top panel to the slip pocket panel, aligning the bottom of the top panel to the slip pocket and making sure that those handles nest inside the side panels. It's time to add the bottom panel. Make sure everything is aligned and you will clip that all together. Now it's time to head to the machine and you will sew both the top and the bottom panels to the slip pocket. You will open up the top and the bottom panels with the seam allowances facing down, and then it's time to go back and top stitch along both of those panels. With both of the pockets complete, we can now add the side tab. Just want to make sure to have both of the panels right next to each other so we can double check the placement. Make sure that both of the pocket panels are completely aligned, and then align the Velcro to one another. I am making a minor adjustment with the placement, and then it's time to base the tab in place, which I've done off camera. With the exterior panels complete, it is time to move on to the card slot line. You want to grab your card slots and just make sure that all of the markings are complete. I like to make sure that the peak markings are always shown on the right side of the fabric, with the valley folds on the wrong side of the fabric. When you do that, you know exactly where to fold. So here is the right side of the lining, and I'm making finger press folds wherever I see those peak markings. Then on the wrong side, I am making folds wherever I see those valley markings. Once you've done those initial finger press folds, we're going to go back and then fan fold the entire lining back together, making sure that the sides are nice and aligned. You'll want to clip everything into place because we are going to make sure that those spaces between each top fold is around 5/8 of an inch. It's all going to be dependent on how thick your material is. Once you have the card slots completely folded together and you are happy with the evenness of the folds, you'll want to make sure that you double check and you compare it to your card sides, and just make sure that all three of these pieces are the same height. Once you're happy, go ahead and press the card slots. Then it's time to be back at the machine. You will edge stitch along all 4 peak folds, making sure that you push the rest of the card slots out of the way. Once all of the card slots have been edge stitched, you'll want to go back to your work surface and then compare the height of the card slots to your card sides again. Make sure that the spacing between each slot is even, and then clip into place. You will baste each side of the card slots, which I have done off camera. With the card slots basted, it is time to add the card sides onto the card slots, right sides together. You match up those sides, clip, and then you will sew with a regular seam allowance. And now it's back at the machine to sew the card sides to the card slots. Once you are finished sewing each of the card sides to the card slots, you can go through and clip any of the corners in the card slots. This will help reduce bulk when you top stitch. But since I am using a very lightweight waterproof canvas, I am skipping that. Open up the card sides, make sure that you press those seams well, and then go back through and top stitch the card sides down, going through the seam allowance. And just like with the exterior panels, it is time to add the top and bottom panels to the card slots. You'll want to make sure that the right sides are facing together, and you will sew with a regular seam allowance. We are back at the machine, and there is definitely nothing new here. You are going to sew the top to the card slots, and then you will sew the bottom panel to the card slots. Once you are done, you will open up both the top and bottom, pressing the seam allowance with the top up top, and then the bottom panel, that seam allowance is going to be pressed down toward the bottom of the bag. You will top stitch along both of the seams, and this panel should match your full panel. All right, we are in the home stretch and getting ready to finish assembling the bag. Please note I am adding rivets now, and this is a little bit out of turn. It's about one step early. I guess I was a little bit too excited to add the rivets before sewing the external panels together, but we will keep trucking ahead. So you'll see that I marked the rivets, and I'm using my good old punch to create the holes for the. Once all of the holes are pressed, I'm going to use a little bit of fray check to make sure that the holes don't expand. And in addition to that, I am using some leather washers I made. I'm going to add in each rivet first and then add in a washer behind it, because with the wax canvas, it hasn't been interfaced, and I do not want that fabric to open up and expand over time and us basically losing a rivet, which will be very unsightly. So I'm adding in the leather washer. It's about a 10 millimeter I use with a hand punch that I have, and then I'll use my heavy duty press here to make sure that everything is secured. You'll see that the rivets have been added to both of the external panels, and now it is time to sew these together. We are going to sew the two sides that do not have the Velcro. So you're going to lay the cargo pocket side down and then place the slip pocket on top. As you match these two external panels together, you can match up all of the seams so that when you sew everything together, it will all match. So I like to start with the top seam and then that bottom seam, and then be able to ease the rest of it together. Then it's time to head over to your machine and sew the two panels together. Make sure to clip the corners to reduce some bulk. Then you will open up the seam and press that seam allowance open. Unfortunately, I lost a little bit of video, but it is just me sewing down either side of that seam, securing the seam allowance down underneath. It gets a little tricky top stitching right by that ring tab, but I should have switched over to my narrow presser foot or a zipper foot. Now it's time to work on assembling the lining. You'll want to leave the card slot right side up on your work surface, and then put the full panel on top with right sides together. I'm just double checking to make sure that everything fits and is the same size as the full panel. If everything is satisfactory, then I can clip the panels together, making sure I leave space to turn the bag later on. And we're back at the machine, making sure that I just sew up to the markings I made and leaving that opening to turn the bag later on. We are still on step 34 of the instructions, and instead of marking the drawstring opening or the drawstring channel on the right side of the fabric, I've marked it on the wrong side of the fabric so you could just see things a little bit more clearly. Essentially, all you are doing is just top stitching and sewing that seam allowance open. This is going to allow the drawstring insertion to be so much more easier. We are not sewing the entire seam allowance down like we did with the external panels, because it'll just make closing up the lining much easier once we get to the end of the whole process. Now it is time to sew the lining to the main external panel. You're going to tuck in those handles just to make things a little bit easier. I like to match up this center seam first. And again, when I bust out the pins, I like to make sure that my seams are completely matching. And again, wherever there is a seam, I like to match them together. Now it's back at the machine, and we are going to start with the entire bag. It's going to be upside down, and we're going to move from that bottom notch and sew all the way around the top of the bag, essentially just skipping over where the drawstring channel is going to be. You're going to want to backstitch well for that drawstring channel, and you also want to make sure that you sew the 2 or 3 stitches right there in the corner above the drawstring channel. It will just make tucking in the seam allowance a little bit easier when you turn the whole bag right side out. Again, we're going to go into this corner with your seam allowance, and when you pivot right here, you're going to make 2 or 3 stitches, backstitch well, and then jump over the drawstring opening, backstitch well again, and then continue on to that lower notch. Again, backstitching well. Once you are done sewing, you will want to clip the corners, and I like to always go a little bit more than the 45-degree angle in order to get as much of a crisp corner as possible. And then anywhere where you have a little bulk in your corners, you can clip them. All right, get ready. We are going to go through the tricky part of creating the side split in the Brooke Bottle Holder. So you are going to want to pull up on the lining so that both of the lining panels are right sides together, and then the right sides of the external panels are all right sides together. You want to match up those side seams, and then we are going to match up the end seam along that side. This is going to be the bottom of our split side, so you'll just want to make sure that the seam allowance of the lining is completely out of the way. We are going to sew the external main wax canvas first, so that's why I just want to make sure that everything is lined up on the wax canvas. I am using a pin to make sure that nothing is shifting and all of that lining is completely out of the way. As this lays flat, you can see how the lining is folded up at about a 45-degree angle, and that's the way it should sit underneath your presser foot and machine. I like to sew this with the needle started down underneath that side seam, and then from there you'll know that all of the lining seam allowance is out of the way. You can then backstitch well and continue to sew toward the bottom of the bag. Again, I like to use some tweezers in order to keep the bag in place and make sure that my side seams are all aligned. You can clip corners here and then open up that seam just to make sure that you did not inadvertently sew any of the lining in with the main fabric. Now we're going to do the same thing to the lining as we did with the external panels. So this starts with refolding so that the external panel is kind of sandwiched in between the lining. And then we are going to realign the bottom corner and then make sure that the seam allowance corners are matched up with the main fabric and then also with the lining. Again, I like to use this needle trick to make sure that all of my seams are nice and aligned. Once all of these seams are aligned and the edges of the lining are together, you'll want to make sure that everything is pinned in place. You'll see that there are some stitch holes already made because I forgot to film as I was sewing. Here's just another view of what the bag is going to look like as you place it underneath your machine. So let's head back over there and sew down the lining with the same exact steps that we had with the external panels. Again, I like to make sure that I start with the needle in the down position right at the bottom of that notch, backstitch well, and then continue on to the bottom of the bag. And I am double checking once more to make sure that I did not inadvertently sew any of the seam allowances into my lining seam, and I'm double checking this on the right side of the bag through the external panels as well, because nothing is worse than turning a bag right side out and you can see a huge mistake. And while we're at the machine, might as well sew up the bottom panels together. We're going to match the external panels together, sew at a regular seam allowance, and then match up the lining bottom panels together at a little bit more of a generous seam allowance in order to make sure that the lining nests within the exterior of the bag. Now it's time to box up the corners. Since I'm using wax canvas, I am just going to finger press these seam allowances open. But if I were using, say, some cotton canvas, then I would probably roll up some fabric and slide it in between those corner openings to create a basically mini sleeve hem in order to press that open. And as you can see, I'm just matching up the bottom seam along with each of the side seams in order to box the corners. Now with the waterproof canvas, both finger pressing and pressing with an iron is not going to keep those seam allowances open. So I am using a double-sided tape here, and it is not just any double-sided tape, it is leather double-sided tape. And you can see I'm cutting it to be just short of any other seams because I do not want the stuff touching my sewing needle in any way because it will instantly gunk up. What I love about leather double-sided tape is that it is incredibly strong, and that's why I'm using it in these seam allowances in order to keep them open without having to top stitch them down in any way. So as you can see, they were added to the bottom and then to the side seam that sits underneath the split side opening. Press down really well. If you happen to have a roller, it's probably good to use a roller on these seams too. And then once you are ready to go, you will match up the bottom seam along with the side seams to box the corners. Pin in place, and then you'll be ready to go. And the other side of the lining is not pressed down at all. We actually want that seam allowance to be a little loose for when we close it up later. As you sew to close up the corners, you'll want to, again, with the lining, sew with a generous 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then with the exterior panel, you want to sew with a regular seam allowance. This again is to make sure that our lining is going to be able to nest right into the exterior part of the bag without bunching up later on. With all of the boxed up corners, it's time to trim the seam allowance all in half. You want to trim them in half so that there is enough room for all of these seam allowances to nest inside each other when it is turned right side out. And now it's time for the most fun and also the most nerve-wracking part, which is to flip the entire bag right side out. So through the opening, I like to always pull from the furthest corner, and then at the same time push with one hand, pushing the wrong side of the bag out, and then pulling the right side out in order to make sure that you are getting an even pull and push. You push out all of the corners of the bag, and if needed, you can use a tool, especially around where the drawstring opening is going to be. I like to use a bone folder, which is a paper craft type of tool. It has a little bit more of a blunt end so that you don't end up completely poking out of your stitching. And as you work through, you want to make sure that you start to straighten out all of your edges, pushing in where the drawstring opening is, and then flattening out all of the other seams for the bottle opening, and then also all along that split side. I like to finger press and then also use heat to press, but of course with this wax canvas I cannot use any heat at all, so it's all going to be finger pressing involved. So I'm using a couple of extra clips all the way around the bag just to make sure that the waterproof canvas stays in place, and then I'll have some nice seams as I sew, just making sure that that waterproof canvas is rolled in and that you don't see it from the outside of the bag. And as I work my way around the bag, I'm making sure that all of my seam allowances are straight. I'm making sure that I'm not feeling any odd folds. Here, I actually had my seam allowance with the leather double-sided tape bunch a little bit, so I just had to go inside, straighten it out, make sure that everything was nice and flat, and then realign the lining into the bag. And make sure that that bottom seam, again, is nice and flat because we don't want anything to disrupt the way that the bottle is going to sit later on. Now with the opening all clipped down, it is time to make the channel opening. So what we're going to do first is increase the stitch length and then top stitch the opening first. Once this first row of stitching is done, I like to re-clip the bag and then sew in the same exact direction to make sure that none of the fabric is shifting and that you get a weird directional pull. With the handles pushed out of the way, you will have enough space in order to create that second line, that second parallel line of stitching in order to create the drawstring channel. Make sure you refer to the instructions for the exact seam allowance. And now it's time to move on to top stitching along that split side. First, you can see that I've switched over to my narrow presser foot. You can also switch over to your zipper foot in order to move around that ring tab. You can see some previous stitch holes on my wax canvas because I completely forgot to hit record. So I am again sewing this for a second time for you. In order to make this sewing a little bit easier, you want to flip your bag inside out and sew from there. That will allow you to get in close, and then also once you get close to the bottom of the seam here, you will want to fold the bag opening in half, either toward the lining or even toward the outside of the bag. You just want to fold it down in half in order to be able to maneuver around at the base of the opening. An optional thing you can do is just top stitch along this split side and then angle in toward the base of the seam and just stop and back stitch. Then go to the other side of the split seam and sew down from there, so that you take the seam and you split it in half versus what I'm doing and sewing a continuous seam. Now it's time to close up the lining. You'll see that I have already pinned the lining shut, making sure that I have matched up the seam allowances and am keeping that side seam nice and straight. You want to just make sure to edge stitch, increase your stitch length as needed. You can optionally hand stitch this opening shut to make it completely seamless, but since a water bottle is covering everything up, there is kind of no need for me. Once you are done closing up the opening, then just push in your lining and make sure that everything nests in properly. Now we are going to add our drawstring and our stoppers. I am using actually a 3mm macrame cord, and you can see that I have a couple of different stoppers. The yellow one has a 3mm opening, while the black and the green one both have 5mm openings. I'll have links for all of these cord stops in my video description. To insert the drawstring through the channel, I like to create a knot at one end of my string and then use my bodkin or my threader to grab onto that knot. It just makes it easier, especially when you're dealing with stiffer fabric, to make sure that you do not lose your cording inside that channel. Then you just move thoughtfully through the channel, making sure that you can get past the seam allowances in the center seam there. And once you are done navigating the drawstring channel, it is a great trick to use some Scotch tape to create a more structured point on the string, since the stuff really tends to unravel, and I'm using cotton string, so I can't even melt it. And now with the Scotch tape points, you can thread them through the stopper so much more easily. And then from here, you can knot both of the tails together, or you can knot them off separately. It's all up to you. Make sure it is nice and tight while leaving as much of the string as possible, and then you will cut off any excess. And then you are done. Grab your favorite water bottle. Make sure that all of the placement is in check. Everything is working and you are ready for some hydration. Thanks so much for making a Love You Sew pattern. Don't forget to like and subscribe in order to support this channel and all of my sewing patterns.